All right, everyone. Welcome to Coach's Corner. I have Hayley Campbell here with me from Core Advantage. Hayley's been one of our regular participants during Coach's Corner throughout. And in this month, when I was looking to get some female presenters on, Hayley put her name forward, or her name was put forward actually by Durham. And she's happily taken up the offer, and we're just going to have a little bit of a chat tonight about how she got in the industry and what she's done so far and where she sees her career heading. So first off, Hayley, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So first off, I guess the big question for anyone doing any job is, why did you get into strength and conditioning? What was your biggest influences?
Like as a kid, I grew up playing heaps and heaps of sport, and I feel like this is the same story with most strength and conditioning coaches, is that loved the atmosphere of sport and realized at some point that they weren't going to be doing it as a profession. For me, that was when I got to a certain level of netball and got told that I was too short, even as a mid-court player. So,
and just for reference, how tall are you?
I'm 168 centimeters.
Okay, yeah.
So pretty itty bitty compared to the girls, even in VNL.
Yeah.
But that was just as a junior. Like, I knew in high school that I wanted to be in the sporting field. Like, I'm the type of person where if I'm not 100% interested in something, I'm just not going to take it in, and I find it really hard to stay motivated. So growing up in a small country town, if you don't play sport, you're the weird kid really, and there's not much else to do. So that for me started working in a clinical setting. And then once I worked in there for a couple of years, that then switched over to strength and conditioning, because I wanted to be sort of more amongst the action, I suppose is the best way to put it. As far as influences go, like I found core pretty early and sort of set my mind that that's where I was going to be. And pretty much since I started my degree was working towards being there in some aspects. So they would be the biggest influence, I would say.
Yeah. And were you the 18, 19-year-old in the gym? Were you in the gym early training yourself? Or like, because I know for a lot of male S&C coaches, we're all in the gym early and we're reading like T Nation and various other magazines, and we've got all these, I guess, male figures that are in the industry, have been in the industry for 20, 30 years. And unfortunately, you don't yet see that in the S&C. Like, it's now starting to become a lot more prominent female figureheads in the industry. However, there's not too many that I can call off top of my head that have been doing it like Mike Boyle for 40 years.
Yeah. I was in the gym, but I'll stick my hand up and say I bought every single at-home conditioning get abs program that there was. So actually, in my most recent Instagram post, I replied to someone's comment and said at one point I was doing like 50 sit-ups a day and thought that my core was elite. So I was training and I had the interest, and I've always like prided myself on my fitness and my sporting ability, I suppose, but I wouldn't say I was training properly. There definitely is a massive shortage, and I don't know how we're going to go about changing it, but there is such a massive shortage of educated females putting out programs like that, or putting out content. At the moment, and everyone in here would know, the standard sort of is if you look good, you can advise on it. And it's sort of, at the moment, that's one of my missions with my online content, is just to try and cut through the crap really and give young girls something to actually not aspire to, but give them an idea of what smart training looks like, because there wasn't when I was younger, and there's still not any decent content out there today, I don't think, that I've seen anyway.
Yeah, and I guess it's becoming really at the forefront of the industry now. The social media, I guess, as you said, the ones who look really good, the figureheads at the moment that a lot of people get drawn to, especially the general public, they get drawn to because they think, oh, they look good, they're pumping out these programs, but really all it is just your high rep, as you say, conditioning based sold as strength programs or shaping or toning programs. So it's great. Can you tell us a little more about the content that you're delivering at the moment? I saw your post about the core training one the other day. I think it was really good, catchy title. But what kind of road are you trying to take down there?
I started, because when I first started, it took me ages to get going on social media, and this is the thing I think a lot of female coaches have, is I was sitting there thinking, who am I to be putting out content and telling people what to do? But you zoom out and try and take the fear of being arrogant or up yourself out of it. And I'm an educated female coach who has experience in all of these areas and teaches this to young girls every single day. Like, I'm exactly the type of person that should be telling these people what to do and what's smart. And so I've tried to hone that in for my audience, is either young females or just an easy to find source for coaches, where they can actually understand what the purpose is and what they should be doing. Because I find so many people are so quick to tell people when they're doing something stupid, or that's wrong, or you shouldn't be doing that, or why are you listening to this person? But very few people are actually sticking their hand up and being like, yeah, you should do this instead. This would be better for you, and telling them why. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do, is rather than just tell them that they're idiots and they're not getting anywhere, is here's what smart training looks like. Here's a few examples of what you can do instead. Try these and see how you go.
And it's all about creating that longevity of training, not just a quick fix. And I think that's what a lot of people get fixated on, is they want the results now. They want them straight away, and they're willing to do things like your 30-minute non-stop workout programs and your booty workouts, and restricting calories, so you're eating 1,500 calories or less a day, and you get these results quickly. But then as soon as they obtain them, and this goes across both males and females, as soon as they attain these results, they stop doing what got them there, and they expect that this thing will maintain, and then it just goes away quickly. That's why I'm not a big fan of diets. But anyway, we're moving off a little bit of track there. But so you've told us about what you're trying to create in the industry with your posting on social media. Now let's unpack a little more about you and your coaching philosophy. So what is Hayley Campbell's coaching philosophy?
I found this question really hard to plan for, actually, because I feel like I'm so, compared to, like you said, like a Mike Boyle or a Darren McInnes, like I'm a newborn in the industry. Like I've been in the industry for 6 years, but I would say I've been coaching properly and actually gaining some traction for 1 to 2 years. And the thing I sort of came up with, because I work with some elite athletes, but I also work with kids at schools, and I have a few clients that I work with remotely who are weight loss and just want to feel better about themselves. And the one thing I apply to all of those populations is that everyone should train like an athlete. There's a reason that athletes train the way they do, and it's because it's effective and it's efficient and it works. Like, there's absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be applied to Sheridan, who wants to lose weight, or to Luke, who wants to be, ready for his footy season, but he only plays at a beginner level. There's no reason why that training isn't for them. The exercise selection is going to look a bit different, and the intensity might look a little bit different, but those same principles should be applied to everybody, because that's the smartest way to train. That's what science has told us. So
absolutely. You're preaching to the choir there. I'm a big fan of training like an athlete. I've always thought that is the road to take. And maybe we're a little bit blind at saying that's the only road to take. But as you said, training like an athlete can be adapted to anyone in any circumstance for any potential outcome they may want. You spoke about that you worked in a clinical setting when you first came into the health and fitness industry. Can you discuss some similarities and then some differences, or what role you had in the clinical setting as opposed now where you're at Core Advantage with a more athletic development population?
So the first degree, or the first qualification, it was an advanced diploma, I think, was in sports therapy, which falls under the umbrella of remedial. Sports therapy itself is quite big in America. And one guy tried to bring it to Australia and it just didn't really grab much traction because no one really knew what it was.
And so those playing at home, sorry to interrupt, those playing at home, can you give us a little, what is it?
Yeah, so sports therapy, I would say, is in between remedial and S&C. So it has more hands-on than what a physio would have. And I know how to dry needle and massage and all of that kind of stuff. And I know all the special tests, but I also spent quite a bit of time in that diploma learning like how to do injury rehab and exercise for rehab, as opposed to just have a massage because your neck hurts and I'll see you later. So it was a little bit of a hybrid in that sense, but I found very quickly in that setting that when you think about it, no one wants to be at a physio clinic. No one goes there because they want to be there. They're there because an injury or pain has forced their hand. And as a result, client compliance is so much lower in that area. Because again, it's something they have to do. It's not something they actually want to do. In the athlete setting, or even just in a training setting, people actually are there and paying because they want to be there. It's a decision that they've made themselves. And so for me, that was just being around more like-minded people, I suppose, was the attraction to it. And that's the biggest difference, is client compliance. Again, because they're forced to be there. As far as similarities go, I don't feel like there's enough similarities. I feel like it might have changed. I haven't been in a clinic setting for 2-3 years now, but there are definitely some physios like Laura that you had on last week who seem to be actually trying to coach some strength now to fix people's issues, as opposed to just stretching or just getting massage. Yeah, so I actually wouldn't say there are many similarities in the way that they work. There were definitely some similarities in like being a female in those industries. But as far as the way I had to operate and the things that I saw client-wise in the clinic, yeah, there should be a lot more similarities than there are, I think.
So what other pathways have you undertaken with your education, whether it be tertiary or other courses that you've done or internships that you've done that have paved the way to where you are now? So you said you did do a diploma in sports therapy.
Yeah, so remedial, we'll call it remedial.
Yeah.
Out of that, I did a short internship at Melbourne Football Club. I grew up with the McDonald boys, so I had my foot in the door there straight away. I was probably there a lot earlier than what I should have been. And that sort of exposed me to that elite setting that I actually wanted to be in. And pretty much from the day I stepped foot in there, that then kickstarted the idea of I need to be amongst this more. And that's how I got on to doing my bachelor's degree in sports science. But along the way, I got my qualification for dry needling. Oh, what else have I done? I've worked in heaps and heaps of footy clubs. Like, I'm coming from a small country town. Footy is a bit of a religion where I'm from. So I've done heaps and heaps of sports training and now run a few pre-season programs for some local footy clubs and stuff as well. Does that answer your question? I feel like I just dished out my resume rather than my qualifications.
Absolutely. So, all right, if I were to ask you, for young females coming into the industry who may be in their first, second, third year of sports science and thinking about what careers they want to take, what would you encourage them to go out and do? What experience would you recommend?
Get reps and get, like everyone says the same thing, like get coaching reps. That's super, super important, but start your networking yesterday. The reality is that there aren't many jobs in our industry. Like there's 1% of jobs for the people who are graduating from sports science. If you then look at the statistics of how many males are in those positions versus females, then that's a lot more bleak for us. We're already starting behind the ball and then further behind that ball, I think. So your networking is super important. Like, you just need to find people that are going to be in your corner and will go to bat for you, and people you can be honest with. When I first went into Core Advantage, I was very transparent with Durham about like my confidence coaching and the things that I wasn't good at and my coaching insecurities. And then that made it a lot easier to coach moving forward, because if I was anxious or if I stuffed something up, I knew that he knew it wasn't because I didn't know what I was doing, and because I just didn't have enough experience. There were other things at play there. And being females moving into the industry, realistically, we're not going to have as much leeway as what the guys heading into the industry will. If you were to picture like you walking into an AFL club and me walking into an AFL club, there's already going to be that unconscious bias. And so if you make 2 or 3 mistakes, realistically, they're probably not going to stand out as big as the 2 or 3 mistakes that I make. So I found having someone in my corner and someone that I could talk to about that kind of stuff and actually seek advice on how to fix it was massive for my coaching development. Yeah.
You kind of absolutely nailed my next question there, which was going to be, all right, what are the biggest barriers for females in our industry, and then how to break through them? So are there any other barriers that come to mind that we can discuss, and some tips for how you broke through them? Because I think what you just said there is, for anyone coming in, like, tell your superior, your boss, or whoever may be ahead of you, your manager responsible. This is in all careers as well. I think it's so suitable. Tell them what your weaknesses are, because they've hired you for a reason. You're there for a reason. So they're going to make your weaknesses your strengths, just like our job. When we're making our clients' weaknesses their strengths. That's what people above us, that's their job, to build us up. So we're a more valuable member of the team, and we can take more load on as well. So that's a great piece of advice there. But going back, any other barriers that you faced as a female in our industry?
Yeah, so being taken seriously is a massive one for me. I've only been coaching for 2 years, and already I can come up with 6 or 7 examples where, like 3 weeks ago, I had a coach actually say to me, "Oh, you're so baby-faced, like, and you just seem so young, and, you know, being a girl coming into footy, I just wasn't sure what to expect." And actually like said that to my face. That was the first time I'd come up against it where it was actually like communicated to me. But I think being aware of that bias, and it's something we shouldn't have to do, but the reality is we will for a long time, is just being aware of that bias and trying to find ways to build that relationship. So in that certain case, I knew that coach had coached teams with people athletes in it that I knew quite well, just as friends. And so as soon as he said that to me, I actually didn't comment on it. I was like, "Oh, you would know Jared, wouldn't you?" And sort of changed the narrative onto my own terms. So I think a really good piece of advice for any coach, but particularly females, is you've got to build that relationship first if you're going to get respect. Because like I said, those biases are always going to be there, and building that relationship and having them like you as a person, not that we should be running around just trying to be likable, but if you can slip into the conversation that you've got some kind of experience and that you're not just a small blonde female who plays netball, that's going to be really valuable. Like, that is a skill in itself, and learning how to just plant those seeds is going to slowly remove that unconscious bias, I've found. Because I can't just walk up to someone and be like, "Well, no, actually, I know what I'm talking about." Because then I'm going to be put out as unreasonable or like loudmouthed, or it's just not going to be taken well. Learning that skill of how to champion your strength, like put your strengths forward whenever you can, and steer away from your weaknesses in those conversations. That's not saying that you shouldn't be asking for help, or like I said, letting the people know that are already in your corner what you struggle with. But in some ways, pick and choose your battles, I suppose. Does that make sense? I feel like I went on 3 different tangents then.
Absolutely. I think what you said there in terms of the unconscious bias, it's there. It's massive in the industry. It's like that elephant in the room. And I saw it when I was at a course where there's 3 participants there, and the person running the course asked the 2 males to lift up this thing. I think it was a barbell on the floor, and not the female. And I'm just like, well, that is a bit of that unconscious bias there. Like, we don't know we're doing it. It's just, it happens. And I think we've got to be so cautious, everyone in the industry, and not just between sexes, male and females, but between age levels and disabilities and anything around that retrospect as well. Race comes into it. But yeah, some very strong advice that you've given there. So the big question, I guess, why isn't there more females in S&C, and how do you see the landscape of, I guess, a female-driven population building?
I had a bit of had a long think about this one as well, and I've always been more interested in the male-dominated sport. So I play netball, but I follow footy very closely. I follow basketball closer than I follow the professional netball comp. And I think that while male sport has more of a platform, you're always going to see more males in that industry, because we know in this industry that it's not always what you know, it's who you know. And so you, for example, like, so many people in the football community and talented guys. You're rubbing shoulders with them more than me. Like, I'm not saying that that's like why you've got the work, but it's going to be easier for you to pick up those players than it would for me when I don't have those connections. And so I think that naturally feeds into it a little bit. And it's not always, again, from working even at a local level in football clubs, it's not always a welcoming environment. Like, for example, as a sports trainer, I'll be in the rooms and stuff, and like, people will go and get changed and whatever, which doesn't faze me. But there are definitely some other considerations that need to be made if you're going to bring females into that space. And from a strength and conditioning point of view, like, I feel like it's the same thing. Like, it's just changing the culture a couple steps at a time, because again, if I were to walk into an AFL gym, I'm going to look so out of place. Like, I could very well be the most educated person in that room, but it is, I think, going to be a case of a few coaches have to pave the way to make it less uncommon to see girls in that setting. Just to make it stick out less, I suppose it needs to be more of a norm than a rarity. And people like myself and Jazz, who's in here right now, and any of the other female strength and conditioning coaches that have sort of got their foot in the door in professional sport and are severely outnumbered, that's the thing. We are paving the way and creating, like, making females in that space look more normal, I suppose. It's also very hard to find your voice in that space. Like I said, I've come up against it so many times where coaches just don't respect what I'm saying, and it's almost like in the way you carry yourself to begin with that makes them pay attention to what you're saying. So they're like, in my mind, it's a lot of social things. It's not necessarily like, well, it's not education, and it's not competence. It's literally just a lot of social factors that I think are everywhere else outside of sport and naturally have just fed their way in. It's no one's fault and no one's done it deliberately, but it is something that people need to consciously start changing.
Absolutely. And then from when you started in the industry, is it changing? Is it moving forward?
Yes, I think so. I'm not in professional sport as much as I was now, so I can't speak to it fully, but even just the language around it is a little bit different. Like, how many people do you know that are brave enough right now to say that girls shouldn't lift as heavy as guys?
I know girls who've hit in terms of body weight to strength greater numbers than males in professional
Yeah.
sport, in high school sport, even just in Gen Pop. So I think I'm hoping that bias is starting to go out the window, and we are seeing female sport here in Australia, the Australian landscape, played at a much higher level and on a bigger level as well, with more AFLW teams coming in and the netball league as well expanding. So things are starting to move in the right direction for female sport, and then hopefully that we see that transition into females in S&C as well.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is while female sport can't afford to hire their own S&C coaches, you're going to see a more male dominated network, I think. Because in the industry, and I keep using footy as an example just because it's like the sport I know best probably, there will be people who, like players' brothers or players' mates, will be like getting S&C jobs at quite a high level. Not many of them are sticking their hand up saying, yeah, my sister wants to work here. Whereas I think if, you know, some of the girls that I used to play netball with are playing VNL, one of the girls I used to coach is playing at the Vixens right now. If there were money in the S&C space for them to put more staff on, you would see a lot more of those people being like, yes, well, Hayley's available, or Alex is available, or Jazz is available. Like, I think you'll see a lot more of that start to creep into female sport as well. And it shouldn't have to start there. Like, it's annoying that it does, but I think that'll be one of the big keys moving forward as well.
Well, I'm glad that you're giving it a voice, and for lots of young female coaches, trainers, and anyone in the health and fitness industry that may watch this in the future, I think you'll be a great inspiration to them. What would be your final pitch of inspiration to all these young girls coming through that want to work in the professional settings, want to work in gyms like Core Advantage, and hold positions of rival that to males? They want to be in those top positions, like we see Suki Hobsons of the world.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure to put on one statement.
Really?
I don't know. I think one of the things I follow in just life in general, and I think feeds really well into that statement, is be kind but take no shit. So you want to make friends and you want to be like liked in the industry, I suppose, because that's how you build your network. But I let too many people push me around early. And 2 years ago, there's no way that I would have dealt with the situation with that coach I mentioned earlier, where he called me baby-faced and young and pointed out that I was a girl. I would never have dealt with that as well as I did 2 years ago. Like, I would have probably laughed and been like, yeah, I look a bit funny in that space. Whereas now I was like, well, no, that's not relevant.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think just knowing when to stand up for yourself and having a voice, like, we are going to have to advocate for ourselves a lot more than what the guys are. And that's just a fact. So if you're already behind on getting the job anyway, then why should it matter if you upset a couple of people who aren't treating you properly?
Yeah, I think that's an important message. Bullying shouldn't occur, harassment shouldn't occur in any circumstance at all. So we're going to change tack now a little bit and start to talk about your roles in structuring school programs and junior athlete development. What's your where do you start with structuring a school program, and how do you go about monitoring all these kids as well as coaching large groups of kids? And you've got varying ages, you got males and females, you got varying arousal levels of people who want to be there and don't want to be there.
Yeah. So that's actually been a really, really massive learning curve for me over the last 12 months, because at Core Advantage, my main project is to look after the schools. So we run Forest Hill Academy and we run Eltham. I can't even think of the name of their program, which is shocking. But we run their strength and conditioning program too. And when we went in, we probably had expectations that were a little bit too high for the school. So I wanted them all to move beautifully and get stronger and monitor their numbers. And I basically wanted it to be core advantage in a less professional setting, I suppose. And very quickly I found out that the main goal should just be recognize what good training looks like and teach them how to work through a program, because kids at that level don't really know what hard work is. If you're in rep footy or if you're playing state basketball, then yeah, you've got an idea of how hard you need to work. But if you just like missing first period to play soccer, then you've probably never really had to work that hard. And so education is just such a massive, massive part of it. And if you let those three things dictate the way you structure your program, it makes it a lot easier. So we now focus it more on enjoyment, because if the kids don't like it, they're not going to do it. I'm going to have to yell at them. They're going to hate me. And then no one actually gets anything done. So we've restructured it a little bit now. It was originally just gym, but we do a more extensive warm up. We take them through some movement skill that represents their sport warm up a little bit more closely. So rather than just taking them through the stuff that we know is most effective and works the best, you give a little bit here and there to make them enjoy it more, which is something I've started putting into my programs more now and transferring into my actual athletes. Is even though I know that this works 100% and this is the best thing you can do, it's more of a conversation now around what their program looks like, as opposed to, no, this is the best thing for you. And then we include some more small-sided games and stuff, and then we go into the gym. A big thing you got to take into account with school kids, which I wasn't ready for at all, is that first thing in the morning, they don't want to be there because they're tired.
Yeah.
And then the ones that are up and about usually have the most energy and aren't going to be as compliant anyway. So I think
exactly what you're talking about. I actually used to run Loretto's rowing program. Right. So I used to have the girls in the gym with me at 6 a.m. They really didn't want to be there in the first place. And then 6 a.m, they definitely didn't want to be there. So I wasn't their favorite person at all.
With the groups that I have, that previous to the first few lockdowns, that were just, the only way you can describe them is naughty. Like, I had kids, there are some tires from the coach that ran the program beforehand. I had kids sitting in tires, putting bands from the chin up bar and using it as a swing. Like, those kids now are actually a lot more compliant because they're too tired to argue with me.
Yeah.
And so
how do you go about, you're running a group program, whether it be at core or whether it be at a school, and there are kids playing up, and how do you discipline them? Is the discipline such a thing, or how do you go about trying to have the session run effectively without your Sheridan mucking the session up, or your Daniel?
Yeah, it depends on the group that you've got. So one thing I noticed with the school programs is sports breed a certain type of personality. So the soccer kids are so different to the netball kids, and the netball kids are so different to the footy kids. Like, I could almost confidently go into a school now and pick which sport these kids play. So with the soccer kids, where I don't have as good of a rapport with them because I don't follow soccer, I admittedly don't know a lot about it. The stern voice comes out a little bit more with them to try and get them to do what I want. Whereas with the netball kids, who I have heaps in common with, if they're not doing anything, I'll sit there quietly and wait until that one kid realizes what I'm doing. So I think know your group is, I know how general that sounds, and nothing in our industry is ever specific enough, but know your group is probably the biggest thing when it comes to, we'll call it crowd control. Because if I were to just sit there quietly waiting for the soccer kids to listen to me, I'd sit there for 45 minutes. So I think it is a little bit of trial and error at the start to get to know the kids, and even the school that they go to makes a big difference. Like Eltham runs quite a tight ship compared to some of the other schools that we work with, and so it's not really an issue I've come across with them. Whereas Forest Hill, where they're all still getting to know me and it's my first year there, that school as a whole generally takes a little bit more effort on my behalf because they're not as well drilled.
Yeah.
Again, I very went in 100 different directions before I answered your question there, but
that's good. I always encourage that. Like, just answer it however comes to your head, because that's when the good stuff starts coming out. All right. How has your coaching changed from the start when you first walked into Core Advantage to now? What are some of the things that you've caught yourself on and go, oh, like, why did I used to do this? Or some things that maybe you've eliminated from your coaching repertoire or added?
I reckon me now compared to 2 years ago is like chalk and cheese. I'm naturally a very competitive person. Like I was the kid in PE. You know how they have memes about kids in PE who just take everything too seriously? Like I was that kid. And so I carried that over.
Common with a lot of people in here.
Yeah. So I carried that over into my career and it did me absolutely no favors. So even like day one of our internship where there were 10 of us, like I remember looking around and scoping out who was competing for my job, like, which is just such a horrendous way to, Josh is laughing at me, which is just such a horrendous way to go about it, because the industry in itself already has those issues in it where it's, you know, you versus me for that one client, where if we actually looked at who was better and got along and were just in general nicer to each other, we would be a lot more successful. And so I'm more now, I focus a lot more on the relationships that I build with athletes and other coaches and parents and everyone involved. I'm probably just chilled out a lot more, I suppose, is the best way to put it. And part of that comes with confidence too. Like I was very aware of everything I didn't know on day one. And so it was not just scoping out everyone who was better than me. It was like, all right, who am I better than? Which in itself is stupid. Like there were so many people that I come across in uni and at football clubs and stuff that I missed out on relationships with and didn't get to know properly, and haven't benefited from, essentially, and haven't been able to help because I was too busy like being competitive and trying to be the absolute best. It just gets you nowhere. So that's probably the biggest one, but a lot of that comes from like confidence in my own ability. Like I was a very shy, anxious, nervous person when I first got to Core, and I've put a lot of effort into trying to chill out a little bit in that sense, and not, because that feeds onto your athletes. If you're sitting there nervous and coaching them and just spitting words at them without any meaning, then they're not going to warm up to you either, and they're not going to get as much out of the session either. So those would be the two really, really big ones, I think. I talk a lot less and I listen more, I suppose, is the best way to
critical. Yeah,
sum it
absolutely.
up.
Okay, and then so you've got a job now, a secure job, a very valued member at Core Advantage team that I've heard, and I do believe as well. What do you do now for further education, and where, like, how do you continue upskilling yourself and your skill set?
To be honest, I just talk to a lot more coaches. Like I even like turning up to these, like these are such a good resource for young coaches, because you're getting, or even experienced coaches, because you're getting all those different perspectives that you wouldn't get otherwise. I'm very, very fortunate, very grateful for the position I have at Core Advantage, but the reality is it is just one corner of the industry. And so the more you talk to people in different sectors, the more different perspectives you're going to get, and the I suppose, the more feedback you're going to get. And that in itself has improved my coaching a lot, and even just my approach in programming and building relationships with athletes as well. There's also heaps and heaps of good online content coming out. If there's one silver lining to COVID-19, and there aren't many, it's been that people have had time to put all of their knowledge on a platform that people can access. And so, like, I highly, highly recommend. $200 as a student seems like so much, and for a lot of people it is. Like, I wouldn't have been able to drop that money when I was full-time at uni, but if you can work towards it or get hold of those different resources coming from different platforms, then like absolutely try and prioritize it where you can. That's where I sort of get mine from. And again, I'm lucky at Core Advantage, like just by being there and wearing that brand, people are a lot more open to collaborating and giving me information. And so I try and leverage that wherever I can, if I'm being honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, okay, what do you say to the young coach that wants your job? Like, they're coming for your job. What do you say to them other than "don't take my job, please"? How do they get to where? How do they get to where you are now? Is there any tips or take-home messages that you haven't hit on us yet? Because you've given us a lot. And the best thing about this here is this is going to be timeless. Like, this will just keep compounding and building for any young female coaches or young coaches to come in the industry. So thank you. It's been good. But last one from me. Any hidden gems that you haven't yet laid on us?
I think when I first got given my first session, because that's how we do it at Core, like you coach on the floor as a group, but eventually like you'll take an athlete for their first session. I just felt like in every single conversation I was having to prove myself, like, when realistically, if I were to stand back and watch an intern do it now, it's an intern using big words that athletes don't understand and talking at them and not giving them a breath, I suppose. So I think if you're a lot more open to like asking questions and just treating it like you would a regular conversation in some instances is going to be super, super valuable. Because like I said, it could just be me, like it might not have been something that Josh or Jazz had to work with at Core, but yeah, in every conversation I had, I felt like I was trying to prove myself and convince that person that I was worth their time. When really, like, I was wasting my time doing that. Like, neither of us were getting anything out of that. So yeah, I think just work on the relationships first is probably the biggest one that I would tell me on day one, because like I said, not everything is a competition, which took a little bit of learning, but I'm getting there.
It's bred in us competitive people. It's hard. The old habits die hard. Well, yeah. Thanks for that, Hayley. I'm gonna let anyone from the room ask a question if they have any questions.
I got one.
Everyone
I want to start. This is something I've been trying to think about lately, and I want to know your opinion now that you've been in a couple of different settings, like the school setting and then private S&C as well. I'm not sure if you've done much like actual personal, quote unquote, personal training in the past, but the strength conditioning space kind of covers that. And that's pretty much my question. It's, do you see much of a difference between personal training and strength and conditioning now that you're in private setting compared to working in team sport? Like,
yeah, so I worked at a small business called Vital Habits for 2 years. Yeah. So I was doing one-on-one personal training there. And I think the biggest difference is just the idea of what training should look like. Okay. Like, I was giving people programs that worked perfectly for elite athletes. And it's like, we know that it's the most efficient and effective way to train. But if they didn't leave sweaty and exhausted, then they didn't feel like they got enough out of it. Okay. And that's probably the biggest thing. That's where education comes into it. Like, because again, it's easy to forget how much general population doesn't know. like to us, like we don't have to think about the fact that you don't change your exercise every day, and you don't change your sets and reps every day, and it's not just about working as hard as you can all the time. It's so easy to forget that general population doesn't know that. And so just having those light conversations, and the thing I used to say to people was, just give me 6 weeks of the same thing, and like that way you've got a before and after for them, not physically in how they look, but they might have been deadlifting 2 4-kilo dumbbells and then all of a sudden they're doing 40.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing that I come up against, and the biggest education point that I was having to deal with repeatedly.
Do you think that similar habit of like a lack of understanding of what good training is exists in just the personal training, or do you think it's in the athletic, or I think it's literally just everywhere and everyone sucks?
It's it's everywhere. Like I had an athlete who I work with remotely tell me that she, just for motivation, she was starting to like do some programs online, and I was like, oh yeah, like who are you working with? And she's like, oh, have you heard of Chloe Ting? And
cool.
Like, but that in itself is just miscommunication. Like I said to her that we can change the structure of your programs. That's totally fine, because at the moment my goal for my athletes is just to keep them happy and healthy.
In a hard time.
I was like, if you want to change the structure, then we can 100% do that. Just to let you know, usually these people have no qualifications, and that can actually be dangerous. And she immediately was like, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I had people reply to my last core post about, that Russian twists and sit-ups are bad. I had 2 people just that I went to school with. One of them messaged me and were like, so influencers are full of shit. And I was like, pretty much. Yeah, it's all just like, it all just comes back to education, because it is everywhere. Like these are kids who, my athletes are kids who have access to the best of the best a lot of the time, and even they're able, like even they get swept up in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, education is like the biggest thing for them, I think.
Cool.
Yeah. I think everyone else in here knows me pretty well. So
I have a question for you, Hayley.
Yeah.
We've touched on this kind of before a little bit, but in regards to those situations where people aren't really taking you seriously, and it might be because you're a female coach, how do you kind of, because those situations would be completely daunting for me, or are daunting, how did you kind of learn to cope and not kind of come across as unreasonable, if that's the right word?
One thing that I have been thinking recently, because I think Pat in particular, Pat from Core Advantage does a really good job at this, is if I'm unsure about saying something or like speaking up about it, I try and picture if Pat or Josh would have an issue with it. Like, would Pat and Josh be worried about pulling that coach aside and being like, hey, I know what I'm doing here? And if the answer is no, they'd be more than happy to do that. Then I have a little bit more confidence in going forward. It's really hard to do. Like there are 5 other footy coaches that I can think of that have treated me that way, and I've just sat there quietly because, again, you want to be liked, and it's conditioned in us to be obedient, I think, in some ways. And again, like jobs are scarce, so you don't want to be the one speaking up and like causing issues, I suppose. But in my mind, and something that I carry forward when I work with people now, is if me speaking my mind is me being difficult or causing issues, then I'm not going to get anywhere, and I don't want to be there anyway. Like if people are going to question my abilities based on what I wear, or based on how I look, or based on the fact that I'm a female, then I question their intelligence and their values to begin with, because they just don't line up. Yeah, and I think in particular, like with you, Jazz, like you are one of the most educated, passionate coaches I've ever come across. Like once you find your voice, you're going to be unstoppable in this industry. So like speak up, because most of the time you are the most educated person in the room.
Well, thank you for that. But
no worries. But
no, you're completely correct. And I guess if we just let it kind of slide, it's just gonna not go anywhere. No one else is gonna say it, and it's not gonna get anywhere. So
Yeah. And I've never stood up for myself and then had someone push back on it. Usually they're a little bit shocked and they agree with me anyway, because they don't know what to do in that instance because they weren't expecting that from me.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Hayley.
No worries.
All right. Thanks for the questions, Jazz and Seaton. Hayley, thank you very much for your time. And this is going to be an absolute fantastic resource for all young female coaches. And I think the most powerful thing you said is stand up for yourself. Like, don't let this industry bring you down, or don't feel segregated in this industry, because I know from my perspective, I see fantastic female coaches every day creating new things, and don't get swept up in the influencer vibe, as you said, with answering the Seaton's question, because there's so much more crucial, important information out there. So, Hayley, thank you very much for joining us. I'm looking forward to the feedback on this, and any young female coaches or any young coaches who want to speak to Hayley. Her Instagram is HJ_Campbell SC.
Something like that. It is HJ Campbell _SC.
Oh, I nearly nailed it. Anyway,
I'm looking for a better name so that people actually. So, have you got any suggestions for me?
We'll put it in the YouTube, but please reach out to Hayley, because it's really important in this industry to have mentors, have people that you can chat to, have people that have done the things you want to do, because they're always willing to help. So I think anyone that is presented in this group would be willing, and I know Hayley's going to be a great resource for all coaches.
Absolutely. Like, reach out if you're watching this on YouTube and you feel like you don't know any other females in the industry that you can reach out to. Like, I'm more than happy to be that mentor and that advocate. I think that they're definitely out there, but they're not at the forefront of the industry just yet. And that's what we're trying to build towards. So yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. They are coming. You're coming strong. Here we go. All righty. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.